Okay, welcome to this session. My name is Paul Snyder, and I'll tell you a little bit about myself momentarily. The concepts I will be sharing are basic to all of us, not rocket science at all, but too easily forgotten in the thrash of everyday life. So many times we see business leaders, politicians, pastors, administrators, and even college presidents fail to follow these basic ideas. You can execute all of the best practices and the right protocols, but if the principles in this talk are not undergirding your specific policies, they might be a bunch of noise. I love the Drucker quote Dr. Simmons shared yesterday: "Culture eats strategy for lunch." And Tim Fuller is right. Culture will make a snack out of your org chart. A little about me. Okay, I have a beautiful and talented wife, Angie, and a precious daughter who is 7 years old. I grew up in Montana, where the big sky and the great outdoors gave me the solitude I needed to discover the meaning of life. From there, I embarked on a journey of learning how business and philanthropy can harmonize within a single entity, co-founding an international business corporation with the purpose of bringing humanitarian aid to refugees in Russia and the Middle East. This eventually led to innovation in education, and I was privileged to lead a stellar team along with my wife in founding and directing the online division of a private Christian college, which has been ranked as high as 7th place nationally for best online Christian liberal arts colleges and #1 in our state by a couple of premier college ranking websites. We were also given a commendation for innovative education by a visiting team from our accrediting body. Today, I am working with an incredible group of people, including Josh Fisher and InterLearn, to widen our scope in the founding of a new educational venture called Heartwell Quest that we hope can eventually play a role in undergirding developing nations by giving opportunities to some very bright students who merely need their intelligence to be unleashed with educational opportunities. Along with Josh, we are working with stellar faculty, veteran educators, some incredibly gifted pastors, a brilliant economist whose basic economics textbook should, in my opinion, be standard for every college. And we are working with graduates from Cambridge, Harvard, Dartmouth, Princeton, and MIT, as well as a very talented former Walmart VP, who's one of my personal heroes in the arena of innovative pre-K education in the developing world. One of our Heartwell Quest team members started a discipleship training school decades ago, which to date, millions of students have received training through. Another team member used to be the senior VP of marketing at Starbucks and is now the China CEO of a global advertising company in Shanghai. You can visit heartwellquest.com to discover the embryonic beginnings of this new venture. And also our CEO is he's under contract for a book called Next Christians that should be out next spring. And it's about the future of Christianity in light of the current educational climate. It's something you all will probably want to get a hold of when it comes out. So let's get started. Principle 1, understand your domain. As someone who has worked in Christian higher ed for many years, I think Genesis is an excellent place to start in understanding domain, because the Bible is full of business and leadership principles. Just ask John Maxwell. This image depicts the Garden of Eden. Genesis 2:15 says, "The Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and keep it." First and foremost, we find the original intent for the domain of mankind was to be a place of paradise. God placed Adam and Eve in a fruitful garden called Eden, which under the surface in ancient Hebrew has to do with pleasure and delight. It is defined by Strong's lexicon as the region of Adam's home. If you read this entire passage in Genesis, you'll find that the original intent for the domain of mankind was to be a place of life and joyful abundance. Eden, Adam's domain, was the source of flowing rivers that went out to water the whole earth. It was delightful and meant to stay that way, but we know there was something dangerous in the garden, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, which would bring death if eaten of. Sadly, we are told that Adam and Eve did eat from this tree when tempted by the serpent, and the transgression and betrayal of their domain banished them from Eden and opened a Pandora's box of chaos and death. Your domain is your responsibility. Putting it simply, your domain is any place, project, or thing you should be stewarding. It can be a sphere of influence, a business, a house, a job, your family. The Bible says that the one who is faithful over the little things will be made ruler over much. Ask yourself the following questions. What is it I am supposed to be stewarding? What is it that I am not supposed to be stewarding? In other words, whose domain should I be staying out of? When he was living, my father-in-law explained many times that you don't give responsibility to a person without the corresponding authority. Nor do you give authority without responsibility. The longer I am alive, the more I see the wisdom in these statements. A small example of this is that when you start with the right people on your team, you very seldom, if ever, need to micromanage them. The right person, given their head in their subdomain within your domain, will take you so much further than you could ever go by yourself. But if you start to transgress the subdomains under you by micromanaging, you will likely lose some very good people. And if you find that micromanaging is necessary in your subdomains, you probably have the wrong people stewarding these subdomains, or you might need to brush up on your abilities when it comes to creating a culture of success within your domain. The culture in any domain, be it a school, business, home, baseball team, etc., is only going to be as good as the people it is comprised of. In Good to Great, Jim Collins writes about the first who, then what principle in good companies that became great ones. He likens businesses to buses, saying, the executives who ignited the transformations from good to great did not first figure out where to drive the bus and then get people to take it there. No, they first got the right people on the bus and the wrong people off the bus, and then figured out where to drive it. Jim Collins goes on to say, spending time and energy trying to motivate people is a waste of effort. The real question is not, how do we motivate our people? If you have the right people, they will be self-motivated. The key is not to demotivate them. Another great quote from Good to Great is, whether someone is the right person has more to do with character traits and innate capabilities than with specific knowledge, background, or skills. Even if you are the top dog at your organization, please understand that you are accountable to everyone inside of your domain to do right by them. Don't transgress your domain by making decisions based on internal politics or try to win popularity contests by giving authority away to people who are not actually responsible or capable of having that authority. I've been in situations where I had all the responsibility for something, but none of the authority. That is neither right nor intelligent. We have all seen situations where a company had the right people, but the wrong leaders. If your domain is a mess, is it because you have the wrong people? Or perhaps the wrong leaders? Maybe you are the culprit, or all of the above. It is important to take inventory of your domain and discover how it is or isn't functioning. I can tell you from experience that when you hang on to the wrong people, it isn't fair to the right people. They end up carrying all of that dead weight. Importantly, don't abdicate your domain. The Bible gives us one of the worst examples of leadership ever in King Ahab and his wretched wife Jezebel. Ahab wasn't content being king. He wanted the utopia of Naboth's vineyard, but Naboth understood it wasn't his domain to sell. It was his heritage and belonged to the generations before and after him. When Jezebel found out Ahab wanted Naboth's vineyard, she had some worthless men slander and accuse him, and then had him executed for crimes he did not commit. This enabled Ahab to claim the prize he had been coveting. Watch out for people who are all about authority but are incapable of leadership. These people are not to be trusted and may well try to steal your domain from you. To borrow the bus analogy from Jim Collins, it may be that your bus driver has no business being behind the wheel, and therefore you need to look for another bus. Primal Principle 2, understand your responsibility. Adam and Eve failed to accomplish their job description in paradise, which was simply to work it and keep it. In Hebrew, work it implies they were to serve and cultivate the garden. In other words, maintain its fruitfulness. Keep it literally means to guard in Hebrew. Adam and Eve were supposed to beware of imposing dangers, being circumspect and watchful over the garden to protect it. These could be dangers from above, such as a fallen angel, or dangers like little mischievous foxes or overgrown thorns. So we see responsibility in its primal form is to be productive by serving and cultivating your domain, as well as keeping watch over it to guard it from danger. In ancient agriculture, in ancient times, during harvest time, people would build small watchtowers called sukkahs to sleep outside in so they could protect their crops and vineyards from thieves, jackals, and little foxes. These sukkahs were brought into the Jewish festival of Sukkot, otherwise known as the Feast of Tabernacles, which the Bible first mentions in Leviticus 23:40. It just so happens that Sukkot begins this year at sundown on October 2nd, just a few days away. This feast was the most joyful of all the feasts because it represents an age when Christians and Jews believe the Messiah will come and restore paradise on earth, turning chaos back to cosmos. In the meantime, there are gardens to cultivate, till, and prune. There are irrigation ditches to be dug, weeds to be pulled, and much to harvest. There are also thieves and foxes to watch out for. Think of the Garden of Eden as an example of both your domain and your responsibility within your domain. Some Hebrew scholars think Psalm 36:7-8 reveals a picture of what Eden was like. It says, "The children of mankind feast on the abundance of your house, and you give them drink from the river of your delights." Delights, or Edna, comes from the same root word as Eden. The result of working the garden and guarding it should be productivity. Fruitfulness not only for yourself, but for your whole domain. Fruitfulness is your responsibility within your domain. Investing in others is what keeps everyone fruitful. It is the main way to create a culture of success anywhere. As long as rivers are flowing out, they can't turn into swamps. This especially translates into superb customer service. Years ago, we had a specific case where through an accounting error, a student was surprised by a large tuition bill 1.5 years after he was supposed to have paid it. The original bill was never given to him, but the CFO insisted it be paid even though it was his mistake for not sending the bill when he should have. It became a very unpleasant surprise to the student who thought the bill had been covered by grants and scholarships. To solve this problem, my wife and I wrote a personal check to the college to cover the student's entire outstanding bill. This good word-of-mouth advertising from that one student alone forged a key relationship and resulted in dozens of new students for the college. The founder of Shake Shack, Daniel Meyer, says, "The road to success is paved with mistakes well handled." 2 years ago, my wife, my daughter, and I were visiting my sister in Washington, D.C. One day, we went to the National Aquarium in Baltimore and had lunch at the Shake Shack located across the street. I took everyone's order to the counter while they found a seat. My sister wanted a mushroom burger, so that is what I ordered. When I brought everything back to the table, my sister found a giant mushroom on a bun that was void of all meat. Taking it back to the counter, I fully expected to pay for my obvious mistake in ordering the wrong thing. But the nice lady behind the counter apologized, refunded my previous order, and gave me the new order for free, just because my experience wasn't quite what they wanted it to be. Shake Shack literally paid for my mistake. Needless to say, I visit Shake Shack whenever I am in an area that has one. Investing in others begins with the way you think about them and turns into the words you speak and the actions you take. It means you not only value them, but also the experience they have inside of your establishment, inside of your domain. So are you open-handed or closed-fisted? Is your incredible customer service your best marketing? Or do you have to spend a fortune in advertising to create an image that really isn't you? Word of mouth works both ways. I've had to slow down growth in some areas simply because key components needed to be fixed in other areas. You can build bridges or burn bridges, and it all comes down to your culture. Primal Principle 3. Understand your strengths and weaknesses. Very important in creating a culture of success is to understand your limitations and be humble enough to admit you don't know everything, even within the sphere of your expertise. Staff your weaknesses. Being a listening learner is really the only way to lead. There's a famous story about a man who came into Henry Ford's office, asking him all kinds of questions about engineering and other topics Mr. Ford hadn't mastered. With each question, Henry called on various experts within his company for answers. The man asking the questions was disgusted with Mr. Ford for not knowing the answers himself and felt like his ignorance disqualified him from the top position. Thankfully, none of us have to know everything. I store reams of wisdom and information in the minds of people who are smarter than me and know much more than I do in so many areas. Some of them are over me, some are under me, and some are my peers. They are all responsible for my success and the success of my domain because where I am weak, they are strong. And we all work together, each being mentors and students in one category or another. In Do More Faster by David Cohen and Brad Feld, investor and entrepreneur Will Herman talks about the old adage that A players hire A players while B players hire C players. He says this refers to the notion that while great performers prefer to be among high-performing people who are similar to or better than they are, mediocre and poor performers often want to avoid having their weaknesses exposed and their efforts and abilities challenged. As a result, they often hire people who don't threaten them. And very sadly, these are the same people who normally don't seek advice from experts when they should because they are often know-it-alls. My wife and her sister are two amazing musicians and songwriters. They have each worked with some of the best musicians and producers in Nashville. This is because they are A players, whose musical abilities would be diminished by working with anything less. Like me, for instance. They would never let me sing with them, for good reason. We might all have A player abilities in one category or another, but all of us have entire areas where we are B, C, D, or even F players. No matter what level you are at in one category or another, please do yourself and everyone else the justice to have the humility to work with and listen to people more talented than you. This will only help you and everyone in your domain. And these are some books that are recommended reading. For a thorough education on creating a culture of success, if you haven't already read these books, I highly recommend digesting them with a trusted friend who will discuss and spar with you over some of the principles they contain. Someone who wants the best for you will be willing to tell you where you are an A player, where you are an F player, everywhere in between, and how you can make up for your weaknesses by surrounding yourself with the right people and the culture of success everyone in your domain needs and deserves. So does anybody have any questions about any of that?
Well, I'd be really interested in your sharing a little bit about the mentality of creating Heartwell and what has led you to make that move and some of the philosophical bents that it's taken to create that organization.
Well, that is something that we have had in the works for many years now. And a dear friend of ours in China asked me years ago if I would come over and help some of her orphans. She's got an orphanage in China, if we would help them get an education. And we were trying to do that, but it's so expensive to do that through, normal pathways. So we had already been thinking about this concept. And so that's kind of one of the main things was trying to help her orphans get an education, kind of put them on a pathway. And so what we're trying to do with Heartwell is eventually, and we're not there yet, but we're actually in the process of making credit transfer agreements and creating pathways to degrees for students to particularly Christian institutions.
Okay. When you think about, and this is from Fabiola, when you think about creating a culture of change in higher education, what are some of the key aspects of doing that? What does it take in your experience to make that happen?
I think humility is the number one thing. And also really searching within yourself to find out, are you with the right team? Are you on the right team? And if you're not, are there things you can do to where that can become the right team, or do you need to find another team? So I think that, really just having the humility to not necessarily, don't blame others, don't blame yourself necessarily unless you really need to. But I think, I would just say humility.
Andy Stanley at one of the Catalyst events made the comment, and I'm not gonna be able to quote it exactly, but he talked about, he's like, just because my position doesn't make me the best at what we're about, what we're supposed to be doing, but I am the first one here, and recognizing that your level of expertise may be in the fact that you were just there first. How do you engage the right people around you? What is it that you're doing to attract them to recognize your levels that are not maybe the long suit in the particular area, and bringing those that are?
I think that asking people questions, just reaching out to people and just saying, hey, I noticed that you're really good at this, or I really respect you for that, or whatever. I think when you just ask people questions, it's amazing how many people are willing to just share with you. And again, that just all goes back to humility. You don't have to be the top dog. You don't have to know everything. You can just reach out to people who know more than you do and become a learner. Yeah, don't like, if you might be an A player in that area, well, reach out to other A players. You might be a C player. Well, reach up to the A player. And very often, I think people are so, maybe insecurity is the word, to where they're not necessarily willing to reach out to people who are more qualified and more successful than they are in an area. And I think that that's just, again, humility, I think is key.
Yeah, I tell our team quite often that you don't have to know it all. In fact, if you think you know it all, we're probably doing something, we're probably off someplace. But
Exactly.
we are always, it's always okay to say, I don't know the answer to that question. And whether it means you're going to find someone else to answer that question more effectively than you can, or be able to find a resource to meet the need, whatever the situation is. That's the goal is, hey, I don't have to know it, but I have to figure out the resources to make that. In my role, I don't know everything, but surrounding yourself with the resources, or knowing where to go when you don't know, and knowing your limits. I tell a story of years ago. I taught the Java programming language. Well, I'm not a Java programmer, and that gets a little difficult without having that experience. So I can talk about some of the theoretical aspects pretty well, but the specifics and the hands-on abilities there, I don't have those. And so when it came time for me to train, I didn't do a great job. So it's knowing where your limits are, and knowing who else to bring in when you don't know what you're supposed to do.
There's a multitude of counselors,
right.
but if you're trying to find out about recruiting, and you're asking all the academic people, you might not want to ask them. Like you might want to domain, and again, talk to experts in those areas.
Yeah.
And a number of experts, as many experts as you have time for and can find in those areas.
Right.
And go with what the experts say. So
yeah. Well, Paul, thank you very much for your time today. Much appreciated. Great session, and we'll look forward to having further conversations with you in the future.
Thanks. Really appreciate it, you guys.
Thanks so much.